Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here in such a welcoming environment. Unfortunately, the subject is kind of dark, death, on a Sunday afternoon, but we will encounter it. Just want to tell you what we'll be doing. I'll be lecturing for about 30 minutes and also asking you to do a few exercises. And then we'll do a guided meditation and a poem and then open it up for questions and answers. So I just need to find my glasses. Okay. And there are handouts for people there to help move along with the lecture. Except for the introduction, I might have a few other words I'll be saying. So let us begin. Firstly, I think one of the major challenges in our contemporary society is that it's a secular society, and formal myths and traditions and traditional religions have been exhausted. So we've been driven to new mysteries out of a lack of connection with the old. Many of us experience traditional religion today as serving institutional forms and also as rote expressions, ritualized behavior without joy. We don't always experience transformation in them or the mystery. But for those who were part of the original event and those who are traditional people, the image of what they learn about religion sticks and connects with the felt reality of the primal experience. But when the image wanes its power to point beyond itself, the compelling, effective response to the original attenuates in its stead, dogmas and rites arise, and the practice becomes institutionalized. And the leaders of the institutions really don't communicate the depth of the original traditional values, but they become institutionalized, and people become despondent about it and leave religion. Because what religion is today, sometimes it severs the effective connection to the founding experience and the generative values that were in its origin. The modern person says, I will not serve that which does not serve my soul. But he or she has not yet found a commanding substitute for the old myth, so we live with greater insecurity as we face death. We're in a state where we know what we don't want, what does not fit, but have not yet found a substitute to fulfill our lonely souls. Hence, we are betwixt and between in a liminal state. Yet, also a state of discovery to ask every day, what matters in the end? And we come to the conclusion that we want to be authentic. We want to make a true choice about what we truly believe. We want to overthrow the tyranny of our history, our limited mind chatter that has given us messages that do not connect us to the infinite. So we want to get to a point where we could begin to honor something that is always there, our souls. And we wait for our courage to do so. It will only happen if we limit our aspirations in this life to good health and making money, because then we will never discover that in our later passage, the soul that we all have. But if we take the journey of the soul, we will see that the end really matters. When we say yes to our soul's desired direction, we feel liberated and happy and can then say yes again to the next passage, the transition that awaits us, our death. We sometimes make the error that religion is the same as spirituality. But those who look at the depth of religion, mystics and others, for example, Heschel speaks about the spirituality as radical amazement, that every day we encounter something infinite if we go beyond the mind that is always chattering, that distracts us from what's really in front of us. So today, I'd like us to begin to explore the journey we encounter when we face death and the awakening of the soul as we move along our path. The way we face death will be a continuation of the way we live. Hence, we have an opportunity to examine and alter our life patterns as we become more self-aware along our inevitable journey. There are great fears and uncertainties along the way. Fears of facing the unknown. Will it be safe? Will it be endurable? Will I be strong enough along the way? Have I lived my life in such a way that I will be serene at the end? It is natural to fear. It is natural to experience self-judgment, to feel sorrow at the ending, and to feel guilt. But when we confront these feelings and accept our total selves, we will also become aware of the gratitude that emerges from all the positive experiences in this gift of life. So let us examine some of the salient features that will accompany our journey. Our fear of death is an extension of our fear-based life. If we have not truly lived, have not learned to let go into the challenges of life, but allowed our fears to control us, and thus led a life of strict control, it will be challenging to now be able to let go of that pattern of control as we face death. So now as we contemplate our death, it's time to confront these aspects of ourselves so as to begin to fulfill our lives in the present. Because we die as we live. So if we begin to live differently, we will die differently. Our first task is a life review, examining patterns that we have created that make for additional anxiety as we face our death. Let us look at 4 aspects of challenges to engage with so that we can heal our disappointments and meet our pain with kindness and awareness instead of continuing to ostracize and criticize ourselves. How can we learn to meet our pain with compassion instead of fear? How can we keep our hearts open in adversity? Nothing prepares us better to face our end as entering those aspects of our lives that we have not faced completely. Healing is to enter with compassion and awareness those pains from which we have withdrawn, either because of self-judgment or judgment of others. We need not be defeated by death, feeling of failure, disappointed, filled with remorse. It's possible to die at peace, mostly without pain, still learning and filled with gratitude. As Walt Whitman says, quote, "We go upward and onward, and death is different from anyone imagines, and luckier. It's almost like a balloon floating into the sky, and an unimaginable reality beyond the cloud appears." Dying is to death actually as birth is to life. Each is preceded by what seems to be the only reality, and each is followed by the next remarkable scenario. As we leave the womb unwillingly with tears and shrieks and enter an unimaginable reality, so with death, we fear leaving this finite existence, and it is not difficult to imagine with anticipation that something far better awaits us. But there are thoughts that inhibit a smooth transition. One main block is often that we are in conflict with what we thought we should be and what we think we were. As we reinforce this throughout our lifetime, it becomes a righteous indignation toward ourselves. How can God possibly love me? I have failed God, but more so, I have failed myself. And we sling these arrows of punishment upon ourselves. We must face this unconscious script and heal it. We need to breathe through this, unmask this, and realize how our thoughts have punished us all these years. And we are more than these slings and arrows we have created and become the skewed, constricted identity that we are familiar with, an identity that we now find difficult to give up, to release from. It is so familiar to us, but this is our task. If we are to face death more peacefully, to give up this control and release to the new. Realize that the hard personal truths that we wrestle with contain beauty as well, because they are part of the truth. We have never been perfect, nor are we required to be, for perfection is the enemy of the good. Judaism and religion is a journey toward wholeness. Perfection only creates guilt when we always punish ourselves for not getting there, but it's a journey itself that's very crucial in a healthy way. We're not required to be perfect, because we've also been given a quality higher than self-judgment, and that is compassion and forgiveness. Teshuvah, the greatest gift without which we cannot live. In the Jewish tradition, it teaches that before the creation of the universe, several things were created. One of them was teshuvah, the ability to grow and change and repent and return to God. Because without this compassion, no one would be able to live. We would be so self-critical. We would always be messing up. But God gave us the ability to correct our messing up, and that promotes growth. It says in the Talmud, in a place where Baal Tshuva stands, even the most righteous person cannot stand. Because when you go through a growth process and confront yourself and become more deep and more aware, you're growing, and you're growing toward your soul eventually, from your ego to your soul, and you're getting connected to God. So you're on the highest level of admiration, say the sages. So we have to allow our fears and judgments to present themselves in our life review and in our daily life in order to investigate them. Just remember, once more, perfection is the enemy of the good. Life is not a problem to be solved, but rather a mystery to be experienced. Death, as all of life, brings a new change. Yes, it is the unknown, but it is also a change that may be a release into something amazing. But we can only reach that state if we allow ourselves to learn to accept change as a fact. We may also have the insight and the intuition when we meditate, or when we go to the ocean, or when we study some uplifting wisdom, that we are a soul more than a body. We are a soul also, and can dive into the ocean of being, floating like a free soul, returning to a time before we forgot, into the heavenly realm. There's a midrash that's a Jewish commentary, a medieval one, that describes the process of death. It's from the Sefer Yetzirah. He says, between morning and evening, the angel carries the soul around and shows her where she will live and where she will die, and the place where she will be buried. And he takes her through the whole world and points out the just and sinners and all things. In the evening, the angel replaces her in the womb of the mother, and there she remains for 9 months. Finally, the time comes that for the soul to enter the world. It's reluctant to leave, but the angel pinches the baby under the nose, extinguishes the light above the head, and sends it forth into the world. Instantly, the soul forgets all that has been learned and enters the world crying, having just lost a place of shelter, rest, and security. We all have this pinch under our nose, and the Kabbalistic tradition says that this was given to us to forget all that we will live through this world, so we need to choose it, to choose our destiny. We're fated to be in a certain situation, but we can create our destiny through our reaction to our fate. And this has always been a deep part of the mystical Jewish tradition, that this is an important state that we're in here to become soulful and to uplift the world and to actualize the unique soul we are. But then afterwards, there's also another world, a soul world, and sometimes we come back. We'll read at the end what some of the teachings are about life after death in the Jewish tradition. So here we are in this world at the moment. And now I'd like to let us go through 4 dynamic clusters of feelings that we must engage with in our life review and in our daily lives as we face finitude. When we do so, we will emerge with self-forgiveness and gratitude towards our amazing and multifaceted life journey. So I'm going to give you some possibilities of these 4, and I'm going to ask you to write your own personal experience with these dynamics. The first is anger. I'll give you a moment after we go through it. You'll be able to write it down. Anger at ourselves, for example, for not reaching our potential, and toward others for not meeting our needs, and anger at ourselves for having these needs, anger at the mystery and the absence of God. Thus, a lifelong journey to maintain our ego-based image, which saves us from vulnerability. Anger at not having the courage to be honest and maintain integrity. Anger at our lack of being recognized, feeling invisible, especially as we age in an age of ageism. Anger at our mediocrity. Nietzsche said the biggest fear of all is the fear of the mediocrity of the self. We all want to be special in some way. Anger at wanting to be something that we are not, rather than accepting ourselves for who we are, with all our warts and blemishes. Anger that we have not discovered self-love, and thus our need for love from an immense amount of love from the outside, from others. Anger at not accepting this need for affirmation as a very human need. As Martin Buber says, man as man needs affirmation, a voice from the other who sees or hears him or her. Anger for judging oneself for this childish need for love. Anger at our cowardice. Anger at our fear of being disliked, at our fear of violence. So let us examine our anger. Let us take a moment to jot down our own personal encounters with anger and see, as we engage with them, if we do it in a consistent way with more time, we'll begin to have more compassion toward that which we're angry at, to see that we're human and our motivations were not as egregious as we may, as our mind began to develop toward ourselves, a mind that seeks perfection and projects judgment on ourselves and projects judgment to God. We create a God image of the judge, this punitive Godhead, because of our own psyches. So we have to begin to broaden our outlook. One way to do it is by yourself. Another way is with a counselor who's objective and doesn't want to put anything on you, but just wants to listen to you and might point out something. Well, you're ignoring this. Rewrite your life story. So let's start with anger. Highlight some things that you're angry about toward yourself. We'll give you 1.5 minutes to do that. Yeah. Okay. Because I know you're not angry people. It's okay. Okay, let's move on to the second one. I know there's much more that you can write about. Do you need another minute? Okay, go ahead. Yeah, I'll give you another minute. Okay, we're going to have to yield to limits. Anurang said, one of the secrets of life is the volitional affirmation of the obligatory. Volitional affirmation of the obligatory. We have to choose to yield to limits at times, And when we do that, if we give up the power of the ego, our need to control and let go and yield, we can invite in another aspect of the self, trust, and things open up. It's a way that we do that with meditation, but it's the volitional affirmation of the obligatory. So I'm helping you by setting a limit instead of frustrating you. You just examine the frustration Everything can be a learning experience. At any rate, we'll move on to the second cluster. The second cluster is fear. Perhaps the biggest fear is the fear of the uncontrollable unknown, the unsafe. Fear says we will not be up to our dying, much less death. We will not be able to let go gracefully into the face of the unknown because it is the unknown. But if we face our fears and let go and accept the fullness of who we are, surrender this familiarity of suffering and punishment of the self, we might be okay. Another fear is our fear of judgment. In our own minds, projecting our own self-judgment with so little self-compassion onto an image of God that we create, that we have to meet now, who's going to judge us because we're so miserable human beings. So we miss the potential of dying, of entering the amazing light that those who have had near-death experiences report. I don't know if anyone has ever seen the film Resurrection. It's an old film. I'm an old man, so I saw this film 20, 30 years ago with Ellen Burstyn and Sam Shepard and Richard Farnsworth. It's a story about a woman who, it's a true story. It's a biography of a true story of a person who wound up at UCLA. Rosalind Breuer, her name is. But the story is that she was driving along the coast with her husband by the cliffs of Malibu, and they skidded, and the car tumbled down the cliffs, and her husband died, and she was in the hospital, and the monitor said that she too had lost her heartbeat, and she was declared dead, but she returned. And she reported that what she saw during these moments was a ray of light and relatives that had passed on before her, welcoming her there. She experienced this great love and overcame the anxiety of the unknown. She knew that there was love and there was a place afterwards. So, and she was able to also state what the doctors were doing in the room and what they said. So there was something very amazing that happened to her, and as a result, she became a healer. She was able to empathize with other people who had anxiety because she felt so centered, and in her presence, their bodies were healed, because much of the body illness is because of the mind, and the body takes on the symptom. So she became a famous healer, and they also tried to study her scientifically. They hooked her up to all kinds of machines at UCLA, and they discovered that she was very calm based on experiences. They try to stress her out, and it seems that when we can encounter something, an experience that makes us feel very comforted, we can transform ourselves to another dimension and feel that there's something more, and we become less ego-bound. We become less worried about what amount of money we're making or all the things we want to do for self-aggrandizement. We find meaning and purpose in trying to serve the world and to try to also actualize the very gift that we were given uniquely by God to live out in this world. There's this Hasidic tale, it's found in the Tales of Martin Buber, that says there was a famous man named Reb Zushia who was dying, and his students came to him and said, "What are you going to do when you get to heaven and God will ask you, why weren't you like Moses or Abraham or Jacob?" And he said, "I'm more worried if God will ask me, why weren't you Zushia? Why didn't you live up to your own unique potential? I created you uniquely, and each of us are created uniquely to bring something specific to this world." So that's what happened with, you can get that film, Resurrection. It will change your life. I've taught classes on human growth and behavior through life cycle for many years. Whenever I show this film, students make such an impact on them. But don't get the Resurrection. That's a modern one. That's a horror film. This is the one with Ellen Burstyn, Sam Shepard, and Richard Farnsworth. Okay. So it's very human to be afraid. The antidote is to know that God loves us no matter what we think we deserve. And when you love, you forgive. So we have to confront our self-judgment and our fears. So let's take a moment and write down some fears, personal fears that you may have in facing death. And you could continue with this, after the session and the rest of your lives to write about your fears. Hopefully they'll be overcome after the session. I'm just joking. Okay. So let's move on to the third cluster. The third cluster is one of sorrow. This, when we face death, the sadness of leaving behind all our loved ones and leaving behind the continuation and excitement of life, no longer able to join with our family and friends and all of our unfinished business. The mourning of the passing of one's own life as autumn moves into desolate winter. The soul is also deeply grieved at the awareness of the dying of the body, which had been its sole point of focus and orientation for the duration of its life in this reincarnation, this turn of the karmic wheel. The sadness is very deep, and passion is an intrinsic component of both sorrow and joy. Sadness is deeply woven into the task of letting go, of saying goodbye to reality as we have known it. So let us allow ourselves to feel and express our sadness to those who we have to say goodbye to or to unfinished business. Take a moment to write down what you would be sad about when you were facing death. And fourth, the last dynamic is the feeling of guilt. Guilt for choosing safety rather than taking risks, for avoiding difficult decisions, and thus having remained stuck in inauthentic situations. They've done surveys of people who face death and what they are most anxious about, and it's usually about regret. Regret for things that they have never really done that they wanted to do. So, and having remained in authentic situations. Guilt for lack of acceptance for life as it is, always wanting to change, always wanting to be someplace else. You know, there's a tale, a Hasidic tale about that, about a man who from Buber's tales, about a man who has this dream that a big treasure is buried in this other town in Poland, in Gdansk. And he has a dream again, and a third time. So he says, I better follow my dream. There's a saying that says you could live out your dream or you could dream away your life. It's better to live out your dream. So he went on this journey to Poland. This treasure was supposed to be buried under a bridge. So he reached the bridge and he saw an officer, a gendarme, guarding the bridge. And he went over to him and he said, you know, I just had this dream. I'm from this small town in Poland. My name is Jacob. I had this dream that there's a big treasure buried under your bridge. So the gendarme said back to him, he said, that's very strange. Last night I had a dream that in the very town that you came from, in a house of Jacob, under his fireplace, is an amazing treasure buried. So we sometimes go off and don't really live and experience what we have right in front of us. And we live in our desires for the future and always remain frustrated. Of course, one of the major challenges in life is when following a dream is courageous or cowardice from not facing what you have, or whether staying where you are and accepting what you are is a lack of courage to move on and take a risk for something else. It's hard to sort that out, so we have to meditate and take time to listen to our heart, not just to our mind, our chatter mind. We'll soon see the mind gives us messages all the time, but we are not solely beings of the mind. We know that when we observe the mind, we see there's something else that's observing my monkey mind, and the mind never stops. You know, even when we meditate, we notice, so it keeps going on and on. So we have to learn not to be limited by the mind and obsessively use it as a procrastination, as an inability to move ahead because we have all these messages cluttering ourselves. We need a time where we could center and sit down and follow our heart. You know, as Joseph Campbell says, follow your bliss. You know, and this is what happens when we encounter death, because then we have the opportunity to clarify. We only have a short time, so what do I really want to do? And then we could do our life review and make that shift from ego boundedness to soul consciousness, and we feel happier at that point. We have meaning, and therefore death can be a blessing in that sense to alter our life path. So guilt for lack of acceptance of life as it is, for living a life of the ego and selfishness, guilt for acting out on impulses and desires, and guilt for remaining with an innate anger at feeling a victim within life, meaning that, I never got what I wanted and it wasn't my fault, it's just circumstances, and we give ourselves a message of victim and depression, and that feeds on itself. Other people don't want to be around you, and of course then you don't get what you want. Guilt for having anger at ourselves, for having such egoistic values rather than soulful ones, all the while preaching the virtues of the spiritual life. Some people feel they cannot die in peace and are racked with guilt because they have not fulfilled their ambitions. Life have not given them the accolades that they deserved. Some feel guilty that they have not attained enlightenment, not found the deeper meaning of life. The elusive dreams that they sought, stardom, their book published, their true love found, their temper defeated, was substituted as their proof of failure, for they were more attached to the objects of life rather than appreciative of its unfolding, the everyday, to discover what we already do possess. There's a saying that teaches us in the Talmud. It says, why did God create us with two eyes? God created us with one nose, with one mouth. God could create us with one eye. So the Talmud says, God created us with a good eye to see all the beautiful things in life, and a weak eye to overlook all the negative things in life. Or another way of putting it, we have to move from the realm of habitual wanting to the realm of habitual having. Rather than saying, I want this, I need this, and our minds chatter, say, I have this, I have that. God gave me everything I needed. It's up to me now to make lemons into lemonade. But even those lemons that which are perceived to be negative, there's always a learning experience. If we look at life as a learning experience, we know that both the negative and the positive are essential. Another thing that's very important is the shadow. We can't just love ourselves when we think we're doing the right thing. We have to also acknowledge that we're very human. We have a shadow, and we could learn a tremendous deal from accepting that. By that, what do I mean? In the Jewish tradition, for example, it says, love your neighbor as yourself. In the Hebrew, it says, v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. The word re'ah has the same letters as the word ra. Anybody know what ra means in Hebrew? Bad, evil. So Reb Nachman of Bratslav, a great Hasidic master, says this verse means not love your neighbor as yourself, but love the evil within yourself. Love the bad part of yourself. Accept it, because if you're too ashamed to encounter it, you'll just be acting out on it, or you'll be splitting. You'll have the illusion that I am good and the evil is out there. They are bad. It's a source of all conflict between people. When we don't accept ourselves, we project it onto others, and we see them as bad and not ourselves because we can't handle it. If we notice that we are bad as well as good, we could then have more compassion and patience for others. We're all the same. We're all human. We're all striving for wholeness, but none of us are perfect and lily white and whatever. We all have that darkness, and if we accept it, there's much to learn, perhaps more so than the whiteness. It's only when we struggle, and it's only when we accept who we are can we develop that empathy toward others who are also imperfect. So moving from the realm of habitual wanting to the realm of habitual having, or guilt for not having discovered our true nature, our soul nature, our uniqueness, because we got caught up in habits of busyness and diversions and fleeing from who we truly are and the gift that we have. So write down a few moments. The guilt, the last of the four. What do you feel guilty about? And let's see if we could heal that by really opening that up in a larger way. Because the law is that we cannot let go of anything that we have not accepted as true of ourselves. The only way to change is to acknowledge the whole part of the shebang. And once we do that, we could then let go, because we've acknowledged we're not resisting it. We're not fighting against it. We're not denying it. But it's there in front of us. It might be painful, but eventually it's healing. And we find that place in ourselves that also have compassion, not judgment, and say, you know what? I messed up, but so what? God loves me. I got to learn to love myself, and we open up to new parts of ourselves in that way, and a greater awareness of who we truly are. So, after we deal with anger, fear, sorrow, and guilt, we may be blessed to reach a state of forgiveness and self-compassion toward ourselves, and also ask for forgiveness of those whom we have issues with. Then we may move towards our gratitude for these same people and toward life. Gratitude is so essential as a spiritual dimension. As we approach death, we can appreciate in thankfulness all the beauty that surrounds us, all the radical amazement. You know, when I got up here to San Francisco a few days ago, when a friend took me around, we went to Marin, we went to the Redwoods. I said, bless God, my God, look at the creation that God made. And then when we walked through the town in I forget the name of it up there, but saw all these people walking around, and I said, each of these people have a story. My God, what amazing creation we have in this world. Everyone has a life. There must be some meaning. There must be some power that created this amazing scenario. Anyway, it always amazes me. I come from New York City, from Manhattan, so I'm always bumping into people. And some feel claustrophobic, and I say, bless God. Wow. I say, wow, I'm glad I bumped into you. You look great. So gratitude makes us very aware of the preciousness of life and helps us let go into life and death with an open heart. And the way we live in life will be the way we face death. Where there's resistance, we remain painfully ignorant. Moreover, we cannot feign gratitude any more than we can pretend forgiveness. It's a way of seeing. It's a way of being. It's a response from our innate wisdom, the luminous ground on which we plant our feet. As we review our life with soft eyes, with non-judgmental awareness, we experience healing, we meet ourselves in new ways, and we meet ourselves with more kindness. Part of the process in a life review is finding forgiveness, which also necessitates communicating with those whom we have hurt, even if they are no longer around. Sending them letters, perhaps just the act of writing itself can be healing. Invite in and speak to those whose memories we are so fond of and those with whom we have unfinished business. We speak to those who have hurt us, express our feelings, and listen as best as we can to their imagined response. We ask forgiveness for our actions that cause harm, and this sets our mind at rest. We pray for another person's well-being as well. The forgiving heart, compassion, and awareness heals us so deeply. So we must meet the good times with distinct gratitude and the bad times after the anger has been explored in the same way with increasing forgiveness. Okay, I'm going to run through the last page and then I'm going to do a meditation with you. Letting ourselves be forgiven is one of the most difficult healings we'll undertake, but also fruitful when we go through our life review. As we contemplate the inevitability of its finitude, a shift of perception and values potentially opens up. We may call it moving from the realm of ego to the reality of soul, from the realm of habitual wanting to the realm of habitual having, that we are more than just a body and death is not a finality, but a transition to another state where the soul leaves the body. This is the Jewish view and the view of many Eastern and Western religions as we encounter and contemplate a world to come. We intuit that we are more than our mind and our body, and soon our heart dissolves into a clarity that connects us with a pulse of a greater consciousness of the cosmos. We experience a peacefulness that arises from the unnameable truth we now know as we awaken to the big dream. Would you like me to read to you from the Zohar, the description of the world to come, life to come? Okay. The Zohar, which is a classic book of spiritual mysticism, Kabbalah, it says the following. Does the soul continue? What is the path of the soul after death? The Zohar says, at the moment of one's departure from the world, his or her relatives above gather around him and accompany his or her soul to the place where it is to abide. But before the soul can move, he must look back to review his or her life. All one's deeds are enumerated, and one is judged in the next world for all his actions. As the soul leaves the world, it enters the Cave of Machpelah, the cave where ancestors were buried, which functions as a passageway to the Garden of Eden. In the upper Garden of Eden, the soul finds heavenly repose. Then the soul, the neshama, dips into the river of light and does a life review of many lifetimes and understands the meaning of this lifetime. His or her experience in Gan Eden is dependent on his consciousness achieved in this life. Further evolution occurs, which allows for movement up the seven heavens closer to God. The neshama's, the soul's repose, is completed, and it begins another transit stage. This is just a very brief part of, but if you're interested in the Zohar, come to me afterwards. We'll have a lesson, and it will tell you about the world to come. No, it's just a creative imagination. No one knows for sure, but there was this deep, soulful perception that there must be something more, and they they created this beautiful imagery that many traditions, if you read the Tibetan Book of the Dead or other places where you go through different stages till you reach the next world. So living in the present is the healing. Living every day prepares us for facing death as another day. The source of the greatest satisfaction is to meet each day with gratitude and clarity and kindness, to visit deep within consciousness, our true self, and coax it to the surface. The contemplation of death can accelerate this recognition, our true deep soul longings. And this way of being leads to increasingly clearer insight, a deeper appreciation, and a broader acceptance of things as they are, which arises within an expanded sense of presence. So now, let us thank our lovers and friends and bow to our teachers and embrace our trembling fears with our expanded breath and awareness. Let us allow ourselves, by heartfelt intentions of compassion for the well-being of others, feel a sense of healing as we contact the universe of the soul. Let the mind, raw with its pain, begin to sink into the ocean of compassion that is the ever-forgiving heart. Let ourselves be forgiven for old acts of fear, arrogance, distrust, greed, and ignorance, and allow ourselves to feel the waves of forgiveness transmitted from others' hearts to ours. And when the moment has passed, bid them grateful farewell. Let us turn and say, I forgive you to ourselves, and let ourselves back into our heart. Let us each listen to our life song among the insights that dance through our minds. You will actually find those insights in our hearts. The heart knows much deeper and reveals its secrets if we listen to it. And let us say, Amen. Just two brief notions. In the Jewish tradition, the way to develop gratitude is through the mitzvah, through the commandment. We join ourselves to something bigger than ourselves. We wake up in the morning, we say, thank God for restoring my soul. We're commanded to do 100 blessings a day. Everything we do, we say, bless God for it. We have gratitude. We develop that. So each of you have a different practice. If not, try a practice either of the tradition, or if you create your own myth, your own path. The only problem with creating a new myth is a myth has to come from below or above or through a tradition. You can't just do it with your mind. So sometimes I suggest that people go back to traditional, deeper teachings, not the superficial institutional ones, but Kabbalah or whatever you do, but it's very rich and it's very well thought out. Let me now read you one poem, and then we're going to do a meditation and we'll answer questions. This is by a poet who's speaking about her dying. So I turn my head and look towards death now, feeling my way through the tunnel with a space of emptiness and quiet, that shimmering silence that awaits me. I do not have a passion to remain, but a willingness to go. My body is tired, and my soul longs to fly free to the shores of no pain. Thoughts clutch on my gown as I make my way down the stony corridors, holding me, pulling me back to concerns I'm finished with. A breath, a pause, I relax and then float on toward the opening awaiting me. The place of peace resides so deep inside me. It's one huge and all-encompassing feeling. In the quiet of my mind, I find the greatest truth, the great Mother Father. This is the rod and staff of comfort, the kingdom and the glory. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. This is my direction now, inward to the green pastures and the great light of divine love, the great peace of all knowing. I have quite a few beautiful poems that people write about death, including T.S. Eliot and Walt Whitman and many spiritual masters. So I didn't print them all out for you. Only 1 hour cannot do justice to all that we have to cover, so I apologize. But I'd be happy to share these things with you, and you could afterwards, and you could put them down. So just let me just do a quick guided meditation, take you to the upper world, and then if there are any questions. So let's close our eyes for a moment and take a deep breath. Let's breathe in through our nostrils, through our stomach, a deep breath all the way up through our chest. And let's breathe out through our mouth. Once more, let's breathe in the beauty of life, all the beauty, and leave out all the sadness. and breathe out. Finally, a third breath, taking in all the glory of the universe and breathing out all judgment and all anger. Now let's imagine a candle burning bright in front of us. Focus on that candle, the blue, the yellow, the red light in that candle. I'd like you to take that candle now into your foreheads, into the top of your heads where the soul resides. And now I'd like you to leave your bodies on this point of light and go upward. Upward through the clouds, upward through the stars, higher and higher, till we reach a place of great white light, a place that some call the Heavenly Abode. And we see the angels residing there and welcoming us and saying, God loves you with a great love from the beginning of time and only wants you to take in this love and feel healed. And we look around and we see some relatives and some friends who have reached the heavenly world before us. And they say, bless you who have come. Bless you who have come to the next world. And as we look around now, imagine in front of us we see a little door. Let's walk through this door. Some of the door goes downward to a magic castle and opens up in a different part of time. But the other door opens up to a beautiful garden. Let's take that door. Open up that door and see the beautiful trees, the redwoods, the pine trees, the maple trees surrounding the garden. Take a look at the flowers, the roses, the lilies, the lilacs in the garden. And in the middle of the garden, you'll see a log. I'd like each of you to go over to your log and sit down on that log. And now, as you open your eyes, you see a healing angel, Raphael, approaching you with big, beautiful blue eyes, a flowing beard, a beautiful, shining face, a loving visage. And he comes over to you, and he says to you, dear one, blessed one, I am here to answer any question that you need to know. I am here to enlighten you. Charge just like you, each of you, to focus on the question that you need answered from Raphael. It could be connected to your fears, your judgment, your sorrows, or it can be something that you have to deal with, to forgive, or it could be something that you're puzzling over. And let Raphael now answer you. Sit quietly and listen to Raphael. If you don't get a clear answer, ask again. Clarify your question to Raphael. Go ahead. And I'll listen to his response to you. Some of you may have gotten a response and some of you may not. But don't despair. Everything is a learning experience. Notice how you punish yourself for not getting an answer. Quiet down that judging mind. God loves you. You can come to this place anytime you want to connect with Raphael. So now I'd like you to go down this, in the point of light, to leave the garden. First say thank you to Raphael. And Raphael says back to you, Shalom, my dear one. I send you love and I am always here for you to encounter any of your questions and heal you. So let us go down on this point of light, downward through the stars, downward through the clouds, lower and lower, coming over the amazing mountains in San Francisco, coming closer to the beautiful JCC, coming into this room, sitting quietly and feeling refreshed as you contacted something very special in your souls. You know, the Jewish tradition asks a question. Is this a world of truth or is this a world of faith? Because there's so much mystery in this world. We can't find absolute truth. It's a journey towards truth. They say this is a world of faith and not a world of truth. I'll end with a story. The great Maimonides, Rambam, his prize student, was on a deathbed. Maimonides said to him, when you get to the other side, I want you to promise me to come back in a dream and reveal to me the secret of why good people suffer in this world. Why is there evil in this world? Sure enough, the student, after a few weeks, came to a dream to the Rambam, to Maimonides, and the Rambam said, Nu, tell me the answer. And the prize student says, you know, when I was on the other side, everything was so clear to me. I understood everything, why everything happened. But once I crossed over, I no longer have that memory. I can't figure it out. This is a world of haze. This is a world of having faith without the absolute knowledge and proceeding to grow. That's why the Hebrew word for truth is emet, which means truth. The word for falseness is sheker, which is means to lie. Emet is the first letter of the alphabet, the middle letter, and the last letter. It's a broad way of seeing things. Sheker is three letters right after the other. It's a very subjective, narrow way of viewing things. So the rabbis say, and I'll end with this, the word emet teaches us something very important. Aleph, the first letter, is the past. If we focus on the past only and don't let go, we get depressed. We live in a state of depression. Tuf, the last letter, if it's future-oriented, if we only live in desire, wanting something we don't have, that will also be a frustrating experience. But Mem, we have to live in Mem. Mem is the middle letter, the letter of choice and responsibility. If we live in the present, not in the past or the future, but in the present, every day of our life will be rich, and when we march toward death, that will be just another day that we will express gratitude, forgiveness, and soulfulness, and we say, Amen. I know we've reached the end of the time, but if anyone has any questions and would like to spend 3 more minutes and have patience and persistence, we'll do that. If not, I send you off with love and thankfulness for being with you. Yes? It's great. So that means that you're off on a spiritual journey, a soul journey. When you encounter death, your priorities shift and you try to experience what is really meaningful in your life. And sometimes all around you, when it reminds me of the poem by Rudyard Kipling, when all around you are losing theirs, can you keep your wits about you? Something like that. So I think you have to be authentic and honest with what you're feeling. And if no one can relate to what you're saying, at least you're not being dishonest about it. As long as, and timing is everything. In Judaism too, in Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Father, there's a lot of sayings about timing. Don't get angry. Don't try to appease someone at their time of anger. Don't, at the time of death when they're mourning, don't tell them everything will be all right. You have to wait for the proper time. So that person is not relating to you now, may not be the right time, but it could be in the future, they will also be shifting. And your light, when you get in that place, you'll be enlightened in some way, and people will begin to recognize it, and you will bring them up to your light rather than you going down. So patience and persistence will help. Yes? Good point. So Judaism is not monolithic, and it changes through history. These were medieval texts and tradition that held on to them. When the Enlightenment came and when the Reform movement came, they wanted to make Judaism very rational and remove anything that seemed like what they call Bubba-Mises, imaginative, etc. But I think they threw away the baby with the bathwater, because the psyche in Kabbalah, we have the intuitive mind and the rational mind, and both lead to truth. Einstein writes a lot about his scientific discoveries, always started with some imagination. So, of course, no one has come back and no one can prove it. And those who say they know for sure, they've crossed the line, because this is not a world of absolute knowledge. This is a truth. It's a faith that we're talking about. But so to answer your question, Judaism has different points of view, streaming from that. There's nothing mentioned in the Bible about the world to come. The Orthodox say that's because it was so known and it was an oral tradition, there was no need to put it down. The Reform say because it was not there, and it's a later entry into Judaism, trying to explain mainly why evil happens in this world. So we say the next world. Christianity too is very oriented that way, to the otherworldliness, that you'll be saved in the next world if you do. Judaism is more this world oriented, but nevertheless there is a mystical tradition that speaks clearly about that the soul is eternal, that only the body dies, and it makes as much sense as it doesn't make sense. So we don't know for sure, but this is my hope, and just trying to suggest that in a life examination, if you shift to living every day in a spiritual way, when you meet the end, even if there's no certainty about what will happen, you'll find an attenuation of that anxiety somewhat. Anybody else have a question or comment? No. Well, so nice to be with you. Sorry we're late. Okay, bye. Thank you.